Back in October of 2021, we launched 2 episodes on the EMEA market, which covered some of the trends and changes in the European, Middle East, and Africa markets. And while we covered a lot of aspects of the Africa market in those episodes, given how large and diverse the continent of Africa is, and how much potential there is for absorbent hygiene producers, we thought it would be helpful for all of you if we were to go more in depth on this promising market. Africa has over 1.2 billion people spread across 54 countries. And within those 54 countries, there are different cultures, languages, consumer preferences, and expectations. In fact, it is estimated that there are over 1,000 languages spoken across Africa, and at least 75 of those languages have more than 1 million speakers. And in the hygiene market itself, the demand for absorbent hygiene products is expected to grow to 60.7 billion units by 2025, which is a 40% growth over figures from 2020. So with that much diversity in a market where there is also so much potential, it is critical that you have a great understanding of the market if you want to enter it or continue to find success. And luckily, Bostic is here to help. Welcome to Attached to Hygiene, the podcast that enables you to grow your knowledge and influence in the absorbent hygiene industry. My name is Jack Hughes, and my mission is to help you, the absorbent hygiene article producer, design and produce the best possible products to meet the needs of your customers. On today's episode, we're speaking with Raymond Chimhandamba. Raymond has been in the absorbent hygiene industry for over 10 years and has been involved in both the material supply side and the product production side of the industry, and even spent time running his own product distribution business covering several countries in Africa. So, he clearly has a lot of experience in the market and has done the legwork to get to know the market and the diverse group of consumers within it. Over the next 40 minutes, Raymond will start us off in part 1 by sharing where the market is now when it comes to size and growth potential, demographic changes and population growth, and cover some of the major consumer trends before touching on some of the major consumer preferences and even sharing insights on the informal economy in Africa in part 2. He'll be sharing some of these insights that he's picked up over the last 10 years, also that you too can find success in the Africa market. Joining me today to discuss the Africa market is Raymond Chimhandamba. Raymond, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Jack. I'm happy to be here.
And we're very happy to have you. So as we do with all of our guests, I always like to start by having our guests introduce themselves and their background in the industry. So Raymond, can you introduce yourself and tell our audience your experience in the industry?
Yes. So my initial exposure to absorbent hygiene and nano-ovens was in 2011 when I joined a nano-ovens manufacturer in South Africa. And it was just a very short stint, but I really learned a lot, and the exposure opened up the world to me of what opportunity existed in, for example, quality diapers for within the Africa region, pretty much. And after that short stint, I actually then went off to start my own diaper distribution business in Zimbabwe, which I ran for about 3.5 years. After which I came back to corporate in South Africa in 2014, and in that time, I started writing about my experiences when I was running my diaper business, and that then gave me more and more exposure to the industry. And ever since then, I've been more and more involved, and I've been a speaker at some of the conferences within the industry. And yeah, that's basically how I got into the industry, and I continue to update my information and data, etc. And I really continue learning a lot about the industry. And yeah, it's been a wonderful journey being involved in nano-ovens, I must say. And I've had great support from a lot of the industry peers and all that. So, and I'm enjoying the industry very much.
Great. Yeah. So certainly a lot of experience, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of change in that time.
Very true. Very true. And some of the changes are happening quite fast, and very interesting changes are happening, especially in our part of the world. That's true.
Yeah, I'm sure. So I also like to ask all of our guests to tell us what they find most interesting or most exciting about working in the industry. So can you share with us that?
Yeah, what I've found really, really interesting and the changes is how some of the sort of established traditional brands within the industry, which have been, for example, Pampers and Huggies, how they're being sort of replaced in some markets by other brands. That's been quite interesting to watch. I mean, Pampers, for example, has been so established in the market that in a lot of countries, you find consumers actually call diapers Pampers. I would like those Pampers over there, the blue ones or whatever color. That is actually not Pampers, the brand at all. That's how established they've been. And also, what has been interesting is how the pens are really gradually sort of coming in to become a lot more mainstream than before. Yeah, and a whole lot of other interesting changes. But those two for me are quite interesting changes that I've been watching closely, over the past couple of years.
Yeah, I think we've definitely seen a lot of that. I mean, obviously, the big multinational players still have a huge, dominant share of the market, and they're producing great products. But it is really interesting to see some of these smaller, whether they be regional or even local brands, really start to take over. But yeah, as you mentioned, you kind of see the influence those big multinational players and their brands have had by by the way people refer to them in the market.
True, very true.
So, as I mentioned, you are here to share your insights and your experiences in the Africa market. So, first, I think as we do with a lot of our market episodes, it would be great to kind of start with an overview of the market and particularly the market size. So, can you share a little bit about the current size and potential of the Africa market?
So, in terms of market size, the region versus the rest of the world, one can see that globally in 2020, absorbent hygiene products, there was 691 billion units sold, and only 6.2% of that was actually sold in Africa, which was a little over 43 billion units, as it were. And period products actually make the largest portion of that market. And in terms of absolute numbers, it was about 29 billion units, which make up 67% of all products, absorbent hygiene products sold in Africa. While baby diapers and pens make up almost 33%, which in numbers is 14 billion units. And adult inco is the smallest contributor at 0.5% or 200 million products. But by 2025, Africa market is expected to grow to 60 billion units, and it will grow to about 8% of the global total. That is actually a 40% increase over the 2020 numbers. And baby diapers and nappies will account for about 21 billion products and 35%. So also growth in that segment. And the period products will account for 39.2 billion to 64.5%. And adult inco will grow to 400 million products, and which will be 0.6%. So growth that is visible across all categories, as it were, in by 2025.
Yeah, this cook, that for anywhere from 35 to 40% growth is definitely significant, and it just shows definitely the potential of the market there. That there's still despite a healthy amount of penetration. I mean, I think by 2025 that 60.7 billion units is, I believe, roughly what the U.S. is at now per year. And so, definitely a lot of potential there. But we know that the population of Africa is significantly larger than the population of the U.S. itself. And so definitely a lot of room for growth there still. And I'd like to talk a little bit about that. So can you tell us a little bit about the potential of the market and how it is evolving, particularly as it pertains to the market size potential as well as just demographics?
So basically, as you rightly mentioned, generally there is more and more awareness of, say, baby diapers, for example, as an alternative to cloth diapers. And one observes that some of the changes are actually caused by economic developments within the region. To give you an example, urbanization, for example, is happening at such a fast pace that municipal services, for example, are not able to keep up. And as a result, sometimes whether electricity or water can actually be rationed. So there are gaps within a day when consumers do not have, say, power, do not have water, and all those things you need quite urgently and quite importantly if you're using cloth diapers, for example. So it automatically forces consumers to go for disposable products because then you don't have to worry about washing or keeping them stain free and all those kinds of challenges. So that has also helped to increase the penetration and, of course, the awareness for baby diapers. Also, as the middle class is growing within the region, it means more and more mothers are going to work. And as a result, they really prefer a good night's sleep. And at the same time, they want to be confident that the baby, even when they pass urine, they will not be sort of wet for many hours or things like that. So a good quality product, diaper product, of course, can achieve that a lot better than a cloth diaper would do. So all those factors have increased the use of baby diapers as well as the awareness amongst the consumers. We've seen the same thing happening in India, and we've seen the same in Africa. And then, of course, for the categories like feminine hygiene, you find it's a product that is used by the one half of the population at a cost, and sometimes not a small cost. And it automatically introduces socioeconomic issues in the sense that one part of the population has to use this product, but it's expensive. So one has also observed that a lot of the NGOs have been lobbying to get the cost of femcare products reduced. And in a lot of places, there's actually good success happening there. And we are observing that a lot of governments in certain countries, in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, Tanzania, and a lot of other countries, the VAT on the cost of sanitary pads, of course, is being removed. And that is having the effect, obviously, of growing the category and supporting the growth of the category, of course. And penetration is growing, but factors like what I've just mentioned is likely to actually increase the awareness and, of course, also increase penetration and hence ultimately the growth of that category. And in terms of adult diapers, with the wave of HIV and AIDS that also sort of has happened in the last 2 decades, actually, in a sense, increase the awareness of the use of adult diapers and just the sheer convenience that it offers the caregiver as well as the user is really sort of raised, and increased the use of adult diapers. And of course, there have been also some NGOs that were also assisting the populations by offering this at a cheaper price or subsidized price or even for free. And as a result, the adult diapers category has also grown for that reason. And those are some of the relationship between the socio-economic factors and the population, the demographic and consumers that one observes.
Yeah, that makes sense. One thing that you mentioned that really stuck out to me was the transition from the cloth diapers to the disposable diapers. And, sometimes you mentioned that it is certainly a convenience thing, but also a necessary transition to make if there are, shortcomings in, the sanitation department or in access to water or electricity. As you said, you need those things to be able to properly wash a cloth diaper. So I thought that was really interesting that would drive the adoption there from not only a convenience standpoint, but from a necessity standpoint for mothers to be able to properly care for and clean up after their babies.
True, very true. I guess even when mothers also make the comparison between washing and ironing, and when you then factor in the washing powder, the ironing, and cost of electricity is also not the cheapest in the region. So even without those other factors, there's a whole lot of factors that really sort of encourage the consumer towards the disposable diapers, pretty much.
Yeah. Sometimes it's really hard to argue with that convenience.
True.
So I want to dive a little deeper into some of the demographic and population statistics of the region, as I think there, as many people would know, that Africa is one of the still growing regions, and they have a significant growth rate. So I was wondering if you could touch a little bit on things like population growth and GDP and birth rates for the region.
Right. So the current estimated population for Africa is around 1.4 billion people and is expected to grow to about 1.5 billion by 2025. And of the African countries, we find the largest countries by population is Nigeria, followed by Ethiopia, then Egypt, then DRC, Tanzania, and then you have South Africa. But you'll find that the population growth, for example, is expected to grow between 2 and 4% per year from between now and 2025. And a few more of the countries, about 10 of them, are actually growing between 1 and 2% per year. But a small minority, altogether about 5 countries, is actually growing at less than 1% per year. But in terms of disposable incomes and GDPs, if we were to rank them, they would basically be sort of Nigeria at the top, followed by Ethiopia, then Egypt and DRC, in Congo, South Africa, as I've said. But you'll find other smaller markets like, say, Botswana, Rwanda, and while there's small populations, but the disposable incomes in those markets is actually growing quite fast. And of course, you also have Kenya, which in terms of population size is fairly big. And at the same time, the economy is growing quite well. So they definitely also fall within some of the top markets. But in terms of birth rates and aging populations, you'll find while Africa's birth rate is been decreasing by sort of 1.2% every year for the last few years, it's still higher compared to other countries and regions. Now, when you look at the US, for example, its US growth rate is 12 per thousand in 2022, for example. In Latin America, is about 16.5. EU is at 9.5, in China at 7.5, for example. So despite Africa's slowing birth rates, you find it is still very high compared to the rest of the world. And by far, Africa still actually has the youngest population, because only 5.6 of Africa's population is actually sort of age 60 or older in 2020. And whereas compared to the US, for example, 23% of North America actually is above 60, and it's really in double digits for every other region in the world. So that makes for very interesting comparisons when you compare Africa's population versus others.
Yeah, absolutely. With such a young population, and as we'll talk about here, such a technologically growing population, and the access to technology growing, it's certainly driving a lot of interesting trends. And as you said, it's having an impact on the market potential from a birth rate standpoint, also from the menstrual health or period product standpoint, and having customers there that want access to these products and are demanding them. And as you said, with such a small portion of the population being 60 or older, no surprise that the adult incontinence market isn't a very big one there. But that's going to be growing too, as you mentioned earlier, and it's only going to go up from there as more of this young population starts to age into these more older groups of people.
Correct.
So I wanted to, before we go a little further, I wanted to have you touch on user habits, as I alluded to a little bit. I hear a lot about the kind of the technology access for many in Africa, and I know that's a focus of many countries and companies there. But just wondering where you're seeing some of the big trends in as far as user habits go.
So the impact of technology is actually quite visible in terms of user habits and consumer habits, in the sense that the shift that we're seeing in other parts of the world, where, for example, consumers are moving more and more to internet shopping and online shopping, etc., and taking deliveries at home, and that sort of trend is definitely also happening. E-commerce is also taking shape quite well in Africa, although from a much lower base. And there's a close link between countries with higher levels of internet penetration, like Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, and South Africa. That's where we're seeing a lot more of online shopping. And of course, it's quite obvious from that how it relates to internet penetration. And also, as internet access becomes more prevalent, driven by reduced cost of data, for example, and higher availability of smartphones and issues like that, is becoming very visible that a lot more and more consumers are actually moving towards e-commerce, which in our part of the world is very much more m-commerce, as in mobile commerce, because a lot of the internet access is actually from mobile devices versus the rest of the world, or maybe the West, where internet access is probably a lot more maybe from laptops and computers and that sort of thing. Yeah, so those are some of the user habits that one observes, and also the impact of of technology. And as I've mentioned earlier, I do anticipate that the removal of VAT on fem care products will definitely also impact the growth of the segment. And I do foresee some premiumization of sanitary pads as the population moves from maxi pads and more to maybe ultra thin. Ultra thin femcare products exist in the market, but they still very much much smaller part of the market. And the price differential between maxi and ultra thin, of course, is significant. And that is also what is determining why maxi is also much bigger. But product benefits and product features like wings, etc., are definitely actually what consumers also look for in terms of femcare products, because they also do address one of the key benefits consumers look for, like staying in place, etc. So yeah, one does observe those type of differences versus the rest of the world. And of course, in our part of the world, one observes as well that how the product is presented very much impacts consumer behaviors, because you find if a product is available in smaller packs, so reducing the cost of purchase, the outlay purchase, so that the consumer is actually happier to buy smaller packs and buying weekly, or even if they have to buy daily, buy 3 diapers per day, or rather 5 diapers at a time, is still better than having to buy in bulk at a higher sort of cash outlay at any given time. So all those points you find really sort of interact quite interestingly with consumer behavior, and how it relates to affordability and entry levels in each category, and those kinds of factors. And the issue of whether bulk or individually wrapped and all those factors is visible both within a sort of baby diapers as well as feminine hygiene products as well. I noticed in India, when Unisham launched sort of pens in that market, they actually had them in singles. They even had them in 5 packs across all sizes. All those factors, the way I see it, I think very much helped to drive this penetration for pens. And in the same way, I do see that smaller packs and then ability to break bulk for whether diapers or sanitary pads definitely positively influences consumer behavior in terms of getting consumers to adopt the particular products in a particular category, and those sort of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that we had another guest, someone from Bostic here, mentioned that the preference towards smaller packs or smaller quantities of products, and I think that's just so interesting to me. It makes perfect sense, from an economic standpoint, but just something that I hadn't really been exposed to. Obviously, here in the U.S., you can really only buy in larger pack quantities, and a lot of consumers prefer to buy in that bulk quantities. But I think that need and that consumer expectation in Africa is just super interesting, and obviously very different from what you're going to see, as I already mentioned, in the U.S. or other countries. Just one of the many differences on approach that a producer would have to take in order to succeed in the market.
Definitely.
So with those user habits that you mentioned the obviously the online shopping versus brick and mortar, and the growing internet access and m-commerce. I'd never heard that before. I think that's such a great phrase. I'll definitely be using that more, as well as the trend towards the ultra thin fem care products or menstrual health products with more features, and then, as you just mentioned, the quantities. What are the results of this? Like, what is the impact of the market, the market players, particularly, manufacturers?
Are seeing a lot of the sort of key players within the absorbent hygiene space definitely taking more and more interest in the region. So as we mentioned earlier, traditionally, it's always been the long-established players, KC and P&G, very much dominating the market. But we're beginning to see, for example, Hyatt moving into Nigeria in the last couple of years, and actually then taking number one position in that market, and actually starting off with importation and distribution, but ending up with investing a whole $100 million to build a plant. KC has always been in that market, but they've been more on an import model and through distribution partners. But they have recently commissioned their high-speed line in Nigeria, state of the art, and all the rest of it, which you would expect of that size of player. So that is happening. And we've also seen Ontex put in a high-speed line in the Africa's second biggest market by population in Ethiopia a few years ago. And one can also tell that they're certainly doing quite well. Basically, they about 40% of the products, I believe, are for local market. And, the balance of that is for export. And even in terms of raw materials suppliers, we've seen how PF Nanovens has put up a plant in Egypt and also has a plant in South Africa. Also, a plus or minus $100 million investment to put up that plant. And in this year, PF Nanovens are actually expanding that plant, which shows definitely that there is growth in the category and the segment, as it were. Spanchem, also a player in South Africa, but while they've been in non-ovens, but in for other applications like agriculture and more industrial, etc., they definitely have in the last years moved into absorbent hygiene. And of course, when COVID happened, they were definitely also supplying filtration applications for the market. But yeah, they've also increased their plant in South Africa to cater for the growth that is clearly happening. So yeah, there's definitely interest in Africa from other players. And we've also seen Sunda, which is a very aggressive player that is also entering the market in Africa. They've built East Africa's biggest absorbent hygiene plant just outside Nairobi. They've also built a factory in Ghana, and you can tell a very obvious and clear strategy there to secure the West African sub-region and the East African sub-region as well. And, from those two markets, they're definitely servicing the rest of the region and hence the rest of the economic bloc in ECOWAS, as well as in COMESA. So it's quite interesting to see. And private labels are also, quite growing segment within the market. And there are local players that are taking up that space. Obviously, the KC and PG do not do, private labels, but the growth of the segment means that the other opportunities for the retailers to have their own private labels is also growing. So yeah, that's also quite interesting to see. In South Africa alone, there are two family-owned businesses that are actually quite big on the private label side, Cleopatra Products and Little Masters, that have really established themselves quite nicely in the private label space. And what I also find interesting is how the traditional players that we have seen over the years, KC and PNG, have always had two-pronged strategy to have a sort of low-end product and other high-end offering. And all the new players that have come in have actually kept that formula pretty much because even Sunda in Kenya, with their soft care brand, they do have a product for the lower end and another more premium product, which is a strategy that has been a very successful strategy used by Huggies and Pampers in the market. And I'm quite fascinated to see that winning formula. Even the new players have actually kept it going.
Yeah, I guess if you see two brands like P&G and Kimberly-Clark have success in the region, no surprise that people would kind of maybe imitate or copy that, at least that strategy. And obviously, as you said, some of the brands are tweaking it a bit to make it their own. But yeah, kind of that old adage, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
It's true. Very true. Very true.
So, you've talked about the growth and some of the success that brands are having, but obviously that, it doesn't come without challenges. Competition is a challenge for sure, but certainly other challenges in the region with that growing competition. So I was wondering if you could talk about the challenges that you're seeing article producers potentially face, as well as their suppliers in the industry.
Yeah. So one of the key challenges in the region, generally, it is fairly tough to operate in Africa. Logistics is a challenge. Even operating a factory is a challenge. For example, in Nigeria, as well as in Ethiopia, one of the key challenges any manufacturer will face, and those, of course, are key markets, absorbent hygiene products, is power, for example. You're running a very sophisticated equipment, highly expensive equipment, and obviously quite sensitive, but you will have power outages quite often. And then you have to switch to generator and those kinds of challenges. And of course, over and above that, you have challenges for access to foreign currency. A lot of the raw materials for absorbent hygiene products are imported. And of course, it means one has to pay euros or dollars mainly, to bring them in. And access to those foreign currency, of course, in some cases you have reserve bank controls and all sorts of other challenges. And sometimes just a forex not being available, simple as that. And that is a reality in both Nigeria and Ethiopia. But at the same time, for whoever can find a way around these challenges, those are big markets and there's big growth opportunities to be had. So, yeah, the region does come with its challenges, but for companies that are brave enough to want to get in, the rewards are visible. And we have seen companies that have won. We've seen companies that have turned back and given up. And yeah, I guess there's a name for it. It's called business, and there are also some regulatory challenges as well. I know in Nigeria, for example, the National Agency for Food and Drugs Administration, for example, it's called NAFDAC, National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control. They manage all food-related products, all the drug-related products, and of course, absorbent hygiene products being products that are going to work on baby skins and also in sensitive parts of bodies and etc. are also very strongly governed, and they have to be registered. And that process can be quite a cumbersome one, but yeah, I guess it's also part of protecting the consumer, and I think you have it everywhere else in the world, as it were. So yeah, those kinds of challenges to deal with. But yeah, for the companies and organizations that can take on the challenge, the rewards definitely exist.
Yeah. As you said, I mean, several players have already been succeeding there. You're seeing more growth there, and it sounds like if you're able to work through some of those challenges, as you said, you can find the success. And there's a reason that so much investment is happening there. Obviously, there's certainly the potential, and companies are figuring out how to work through some of the challenges or even these regulations that you mentioned and find success. So obviously it's doable, and companies are doing that. And that's great to see. And as you alluded to before, I mean, I have to imagine some of the suppliers to these producers, the nonwoven suppliers or some of these other materials that are going into the AHP products, they're willing to invest, and that has to give them a leg up, particularly as you mentioned, some of those importing challenges and foreign exchange challenges. If you're in the country already and able to source things locally, that has to give you a big advantage there.
Very true. Very true.
So there you have it. For those of you that are looking to start or grow your business in the Africa market, looking to retain the share you already have, or just curious about the market overall, you now have a good starting point to understand where the market stands in regards to size and potential, what some of the major consumer habits are, and how manufacturers and suppliers are reacting to all of the changes. On our next episode, continue our conversation with Raymond as he shares more of his insights on the Africa market, this time on the different consumer trends and expectations that are impacting both the market and the products that are produced for Africa. Attached to Hygiene is brought to you by Bostic and is hosted by me, Jack Hughes. It is produced and edited by me with the help of Paul Andrews, Michelle Tonkovitz, Emery Chernus, and Nikki Ackerman at Green Onion Creative. Our theme music is by Jonathan Boyle. We'd like to extend a special thank you to our guest today, Raymond Chimhandamba. You can follow Raymond on LinkedIn, where he is sharing insights on the Africa market from both the absorbent hygiene and other sectors. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.